US President Donald Trump has finally and officially backed down, stating that there will be no more war against Iran. And the United States of America is officially returning to its usual sanctions pressure campaign against Tehran, hoping that it will collapse and the nuclear problem will resolve itself. Today, August 10, Trump said in an interview with Axios, quote, "We are de-escalating the situation with Iran." You know, it's hard to overestimate the significance of these words. Because just a week ago, in his own words, the US president was on the verge of giving the order to resume full-scale military operations. And Trump himself called it the largest attack since World War II, but then he changed his mind and gave Iran yet another last chance to make a deal. Now, instead of military threats, the focus is on economic pressure. Trump said that there is no point in bombing Iran anymore. It's better to tighten sanctions. So, basically, this is a return to the same tool that Washington used even before the war started, and which, has proven to be ineffective. But Donald Trump doesn't have a choice either. General Kane, the very same chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has already stated that the US military cannot continue fighting at the same pace. Notice that none of the original goals, neither the nuclear deal, nor changing the behavior of the Iranian regime, nor even the complete opening of the Hormuz Strait, which was already open, have been achieved. And Donald Trump publicly states that the US is simply retreating. In this episode, we'll break down exactly what Donald Trump said and, importantly, what's happening behind the scenes. My name is Pechiy. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. We're closing in on 300,000 subscribers. So check right now while I'm saying this under this video whether you are subscribed to this YouTube channel. Check whether you've pressed the subscribe button or not. And if you have already subscribed, thank you very much for that. If you are not subscribed, do it right now. So, let's start with Donald Trump's interview, which explained a lot. Finally, he stopped, beating around the bush, although not completely. In a brief conversation with Axios, Trump said, quote, "We're dialing things down. We're only negotiating with them halfway, not fully. We're just watching Iran with its massive inflation and the fact that they have no money." Well, this is very reminiscent of Trump's statement about 3 months ago that Iran no longer has an army, no navy, and no air force. Then Trump emphasized that Iran is, quote, "in very bad economic shape and they have no money to pay their troops," and that the American naval blockade has worsened the economic crisis of the Iranian regime. At the same time, Trump noted that the price of oil has already dropped to just over $75 per barrel, so American consumers are feeling less pain from this war. He spoke almost philosophically about the course of the confrontation with Tehran. He said, "Listen, everything will work out." I quote, "Everything will work out, it always does, and this time it will too. It's like a game of chess." Well, let me remind Trump that in a chess game, things don't always work out. Sometimes you really lose. It's telling that at the same time, Trump didn't express any anger or irritation about Iran delaying the announcement of the deal with Oman to open the Strait of Hormuz, even though Trump himself promised 10 days ago that everything would definitely be opened. And on Saturday, Iran put forward a new list of demands for allowing shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Instead of the expected opening of the strait, yet another condition appeared. And now Iran is demanding nothing less than the withdrawal of American troops from the region, payment of reparations, lifting of sanctions, unfreezing of Iranian assets, and security guarantees for itself and all its proxy forces in the region. But what's even more important is what was happening behind the scenes before this turnaround by Donald Trump. And the logic here is actually quite obvious. And if you are subscribed to this YouTube channel, then you remember that we actually predicted this scenario here a couple of weeks ago. So today Axios reports that, according to American officials, Just a week ago, Donald Trump was indeed leaning toward resuming major military actions against Iran, but he was convinced to de-escalate the situation for now. One of the officials explained the paradoxical logic. Ongoing hostilities allowed the Iranian regime to avoid having to deal with the consequences of the war, damage to infrastructure, and a deep economic crisis. When Iran is not at war, it will have to face the grim reality for which there are no real solutions. They say that for now, of course, everything can be maintained. Iran can write everything off to the war, but after the war comes the time to deal with the ruins. And while the United States of America continues attacks on Iran, the Iranian regime can explain to its people that all the problems, all the hardships, all the difficulties are simply because the war is ongoing. Well, who told you that it would be easy during a war? And so the Americans decided, let's end the war. Let's stop, no more bombings, no more airstrikes. And then the Iranian regime will have to deal with all the problems on its own and somehow explain to its society why they can't handle these problems at all. At the same time, according to the same source, about 8 million barrels of oil still leave the Persian Gulf every night through the southern lane of the Strait of Hormuz in coordination with the American military. And the US intends to try to export even more oil while the deal hasn't been made. So in other words, the blockade is still physically in place. And even while there are talks about de-escalation, at the same time, some of the oil is still being exported. Accordingly, this has allowed the market to be stabilized at least a little bit, more or less. Of course, it hasn't returned to pre-war levels, but the situation has improved at least a little. And so, US Vice President J.D. Vance said on Fox News on Saturday that it is very premature to talk about the end of the conflict. Quote, "This matter is not over yet. It's clearly not at the beginning. We're somewhere in the middle of the game, and we're using a whole set of diplomatic, economic, and military tools to ensure the best outcome for the American people." Well, simply put, according to him, the US has decided to just watch as Iran, according to their plan, will gradually bleed out and eventually just die or ask for help and say, okay, that's it, we're drained, there's no money, the economy has collapsed, let's finally agree on something. But Iran is behaving differently for now. Well, not the way Washington expects. On Saturday, the head of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, Mohammad Bagher Zalgadar, a veteran of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, put forward 6 conditions in addition to what had already been agreed upon in the Oman Agreement on opening the Hormuz Strait. These are Iran's demands to the US. A permanent end to the war against Iran and all its regional allies, meaning the preservation of all proxy forces, a refusal to threaten or insult Iran in any form. The lifting of the American naval blockade of Iranian ports, the withdrawal of American armed forces from the vicinity of Iran, which basically means almost the entire Middle East. This means that the Americans should shut down all their military bases in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, and so on. And further, compensation from the US for the damage caused by this year's war and the conflict in June 2025, which was mainly initiated by Israel. So, Iran is saying pay us reparations and, importantly, indemnities. And the next point, the lifting of sanctions against the Islamic Republic and the unconditional release of Iranian assets frozen abroad. The subtext of Zalgadar's statement, these conditions must be met before or simultaneously with any compromise on the Hormuz Strait, the very one that Trump repeatedly promised to open. A diplomat from one of the mediator countries said that Zalgadar's statement reflects the internal political struggle within the Iranian regime. And here an interesting detail emerges. According to CBS News, Zalgadar himself will soon become a political advisor, the supreme leader of Iran, Mojtaba Khamenei. That is, he is moving from an operational role to an advisory one. This may indicate reshuffling within the Iranian leadership right in the midst of the crisis. And here is the next piece of news. It is reported that today the supreme leader of Iran, Mojtaba Khamenei, appointed Mohsen Rezai as his representative to the country's Supreme National Security Council. He replaced the very same Mohammad Bagher Zolgadar. I would like to note that Mohsen Rezaiei is a high-ranking Iranian military advisor and former commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. He has always opposed any negotiations with the United States of America. According to American officials, the split within the Iranian regime itself is real and it's growing stronger. One camp, led by President Masoud Pezeshkian, is extremely concerned about the threat of economic collapse and believes that Iran needs to make some kind of deal with the United States of America, but the other camp, led by the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Ahmad Vahidi, rejects any concessions to the Americans and says that it is the Americans who must crawl to us, persuade us, and then maybe we will make some kind of deal. But I should note that Donald Trump himself is also sensitive to the issue of appearing weak in negotiations. According to CNN, citing high-ranking American officials, the US president has privately complained that these public reports about the Pentagon's depleting ammunition stocks make the US look weak in negotiations with Iran. At that time, a Saudi official reported that the kingdom was preparing for multiple coordinated attacks from Iraqi militias, acting together with the Iran-backed Yemeni Houthis. So even as Washington is toning down its rhetoric, the regional conflict continues to expand to new fronts. Now, take a look at the situation. The war is expanding, and this is already happening in the Red Sea as well. The Houthis are trying to block the Bab el-Mandeb Strait for Saudi Arabia. The Saudis are preparing for a coordinated attack by militias in Iraq and Yemen. Meanwhile, Trump says we're pulling out of the war a little bit, we're just going to strengthen the sanctions and that's it. Of course, I have a question. What sanctions is he planning to strengthen, and what additional economic pressure beyond what's already in place is he going to apply? That's unknown. Even earlier, on August 2nd and 3rd, there was a noticeable swing in the other direction. Less than a day after Trump expressed optimism about how close a deal on the Hormuz Strait was, he suddenly switched to harsh criticism of the Iranian regime, calling the Iranian leadership, quote, incredibly hypocritical after Tehran denied the resumption of negotiations. This shows that the current, as Trump puts it, de-escalation of the war is not a sustainable new strategy, but possibly just another point in the oscillating process that has been going on for several months. This back and forth like a pendulum has been going on for a very long time. That's why now Trump's team says, well, we've decided to apply economic pressure. No one understands how long this will last. The bottom line is that the war has not been formally declared over. J.D. Vance says directly that this is not the end yet, and that diplomatic, economic, and military tools are being used simultaneously. But in essence, Trump has just publicly admitted that instead of military pressure, the focus is now on the same things that worked before this whole war began, that is, sanctions, blockade, and economic strangulation, waiting for Iran to run out of options. Not a single, I emphasize, not a single one of the original, much more ambitious goals has been achieved. There is no nuclear agreement, there is no change in the behavior of the Iranian regime, there is no elimination of Iran's missile program or drone program, and Iran's proxy forces in the region have remained and continue to operate, and the emerging deal on the Hormuz Strait gives Iran control over this strait, that is, more than it had before the war, not less. The split within the Iranian elite between supporters of the deal and hardliners remains unresolved, and Trump himself admits that he is simply watching and waiting, calling it a chess game. Well, that's a phrase that sounds much more like an admission of a dead end than a description of a winning strategy. And here are Donald Trump's supporters who insisted, you just don't understand the deep strategic plan of the American president. So what is it? Look, before the war, Trump announced he would strangle the Iranian economy and strengthen sanctions. He kept tightening them, and then decided it wasn't working. The economic noose didn't work, so he moved on to military action. Well, that's how it works. If your diplomatic, political, and economic levers of pressure don't work, the last lever is military. He went to war. And now, almost half a year later, he's returning to economic strangulation. That is, to what didn't work before the start of hostilities. And the logic suggests the following, that the military actions brought no results at all. They only made the situation worse for the United States of America. And as if nothing happened, Trump says, well, okay, we'll go back to where we started. We'll just watch, we won't wage war anymore. And so I have a question for the American voter. Don't you want to ask your president, what was that all about? I mean, what was that? What did you achieve? And what were you trying to achieve? So why did you end up back at point A? And you're pretending that this was the plan all along. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like this video. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, I would really appreciate it. You can do this by donating through the links and details in the description of this video, or by becoming a sponsor on YouTube. And finally, I ask you to check once again if you are subscribed to this YouTube channel. If you aren't, subscribe right now. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.